They would later say the snow fell too quietly that night, too gentle for the blood it was about to swallow. Clara Whitmore stood alone at her window, watching the street lamps flicker like tired stars along Main Street. Red Hollow slept early in winter. Doors were barred, horses stabled, hearts pulled inward against the cold. Yet Clara couldn't sleep. She never could when the wind carried that sound, the low, hollow whistle it made as it slid through the mountains and down into town, like a warning meant only for those who listened. She pressed her fingers to the glass, searching the whitewashed road below, waiting for Sheriff Eli Mercer. Eli had walked into Red Hollow 3 years earlier with a worn badge, a quiet voice, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much justice fail. He hadn't tried to charm the town. He hadn't raised his voice. He simply did the work fairly, relentlessly, and alone. And somehow, without meaning to, he'd claimed Clara's heart in the process. She loved a lawman. He loved justice. And that difference, that small, aching distance, was the space where fear lived. Earlier that evening, Eli had stood in her doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, his hat in his hands like a confession. The lamplight had caught the scar along his jaw, a pale reminder of another town, another wrong he hadn't been able to stop. "I may be late," he'd said. She knew better than to ask why. "You always are," she replied softly, trying to smile. His eyes lingered on her face longer than usual, as if memorizing it. "If I don't come back by morning." She stepped forward then, resting her palm against his coat, feeling the steady truth of his heart beneath it. "You will," she said. "You always do." But he hadn't answered. He'd only tipped his hat and turned into the cold. Now the hours crawled past midnight, and Clara's unease hardened into something heavier. The town had been tense for weeks. A gang drifting down from the north, stolen cattle, a ranch hand found beaten near the river, and one name whispered in saloons when men thought no one decent was listening: Caleb Rourke. Eli had arrested Rourke once, years ago, back when Clara's husband was still alive, back when Red Hollow still believed the law could protect it without blood. Rourke had escaped that hanging, and men like him never forgot. A sudden shout cut through the night. Clara's breath caught. She grabbed her shawl and rushed outside, the cold biting through her thin boots as she followed the sound toward the square. Snow swirled under the lamps now, thick and blinding. Shapes moved, men running, a horse rearing, a voice barking orders she knew as well as her own name. Sheriff Eli stood near the jailhouse steps, one hand raised, the other steady on his revolver. Across from him, half shadowed by the storm, were 3 men with guns drawn. At their center stood Caleb Rourke, smiling like the devil himself. "Evenin' Mercer," Rourke called. "Still playin' here?" Eli's voice carried calm through the chaos. "Drop your weapons. No one else needs to die tonight." Clara saw the moment, then the flicker in Eli's eyes when he realized the trap was already sprung. Townsfolk peered from windows, frozen by fear. No deputies stood beside him. He'd come alone. He always did, Rourke laughed. "You always did bleed for the law. Let's see if it bleeds for you." The gunshot cracked like thunder. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Eli staggered. Clara screamed his name as he fell to one knee, snow blooming red beneath him. The badge on his chest caught the lamplight, shining bright against the spreading stain. Men scattered, horses bolted. Rourke vanished into the storm. Clara ran to Eli's side, dropping into the snow, her hands trembling as she pressed them against his wound. His breath came shallow. each one a struggle. "I'm here," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm here." Eli looked up at her, a faint smile touching his lips despite the pain. "Guess I was late after all." The snow kept falling, and somewhere beyond the white dark, justice waited and finished. The snow did not stop for mercy. It kept falling as Clara knelt beside Eli, her hands slick with blood, her breath breaking into small, useless prayers. Men finally emerged from their homes, then slowly shamefully drawn by the echo of the gunshot, and the sight they all feared would one day come true. "Help him," Clara cried. "Please, someone help him." 2 ranchers rushed forward with the door torn from its hinges, lifting Eli carefully as if he were already something fragile and sacred. His face had gone pale beneath the stubble, his breath rattling like wind through dry grass. They carried him to the jailhouse, the nearest place with warmth and light. Clara followed, numb, her skirts darkened by snow and blood. Inside, the oil lamps flickered wildly, shadows dancing on the walls like ghosts of old gunfights and broken promises. Doc Harlan arrived breathless, his coat half-buttoned, his eyes grave the moment he saw the wound. "He needs quiet," the doctor said. "And he needs it now." Clara stood pressed against the wall as Doc worked, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She watched Eli's chest rise and fall, each breath a fragile victory. When Doc finally straightened, removing his bloodied gloves, he did not meet her eyes at once. "The bullet passed close to the heart," he said slowly. "Missed it by the grace of God. But infection will decide the rest." Clara swallowed hard. "He'll live, if he rests. If the fever doesn't take him. And if the past doesn't come back to finish the job." She took Eli's hand once the doctor left, brushing her thumb across his knuckles the way she had 100 quiet evenings before. His eyes fluttered open. "You should be resting," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Funny thing. I was just thinking the same about this town." She tried to smile back, but her voice trembled. Rourke ran. Eli's jaw tightened, despite the pain. "I know. They'll come again," she said. "You know they will." "I know," he repeated, softer now. Outside, the town gathered in low, uneasy knots. Men spoke in hushed tones, their courage no stronger than the whiskey on their breath. No one volunteered to form a posse, no one wanted to be next. Clara saw it clearly then, the truth she'd been afraid to name. Red Hollow loved the idea of a sheriff, but not the cost of one. Night stretched into morning. Eli's fever rose with the sun. Clara never left his side, cooling his brow, whispering stories of summer days and quiet rides beyond the ridge. At times he spoke in fragments, names she didn't know, places far away, regrets that sounded heavier than the wound itself. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the town buried under a blanket of white silence. That was when the stranger arrived. He rode in alone, a dark figure against the snow, his horse lathered and limping. He dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg, and tied the reins outside the saloon. A long scar ran from his temple into his beard, and his coat bore the dust of many miles. Clara noticed him from the jailhouse window. So did Eli. Despite his weakness, Eli stirred, his eyes sharpening as they fixed on the man outside. "That's him," he murmured. Clara leaned close. "Who?" "Daniel Crow," Eli said. "Federal marshal. Used to ride with me. Before Red Hollow. Before everything went wrong." Crow entered the jailhouse without ceremony, removing his hat when he saw Eli laid out on the cot. Something like regret crossed his face. You look like hell, Mercer, Crow said quietly. Eli exhaled a bitter breath. You always did have a gift for timing. Crow glanced at Clara. I heard about Rourke. Figured I'd find you bleeding somewhere. Clara bristled. If you're here to stare, you can leave. Crow met her gaze steadily. I'm here because Rourke isn't just Red Hollow's problem. He's riding with men who plan to burn 3 towns before spring. Eli struggled to sit up. Then you should have brought help. Crow's voice dropped. I did. They're waiting beyond the pass. Silence settled heavy between them. You knew, Eli said. You knew he was coming. Crow didn't deny it. I tried to warn you. You don't answer letters. Eli closed his eyes. Because letters don't change men. Crow stepped closer, but bullets do. That night, as Eli slept under the weight of fever, Crow told Clara the truth about the case that broke Eli years ago. About a boy wrongly hanged. About Eli's badge stained long before it ever bled in the snow. He stayed here to outrun that failure, Crow said. Justice is the only thing he's ever loved more than you. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Then it's going to get him killed. Outside, a single gunshot echoed from the hills. Crow stiffened, hand dropping to his holster. They're closer than I thought, he said. And in his sleep, Eli whispered one word that froze Clara's heart. Hang him. Part 3, where the badge finally rests. Eli woke before dawn, the way men do when their past refuses to let them sleep. The fever had broken sometime in the night, leaving him weak but clear-eyed. Candlelight trembled along the jailhouse walls, and for a moment he did not know where he was. Then he saw the badge laid on the table beside him, cleaned of blood but not of memory, and everything came rushing back. The snow, the gunshot, Clara's voice breaking his name. He tried to sit up, and failed. Easy, Clara said, rising from the chair at his bedside. She looked worn in a way that had nothing to do with the long night, like someone who had been standing guard over something precious and fragile. She took his hand, and he held on as if the world might slip away if he didn't. They're here, aren't they? He asked quietly. She nodded. Rourke and his men. Marshal Crow says they'll ride at first light. Eli closed his eyes, shame flickering across his face. I brought this on you. On the town. You didn't bring justice, she said. It came looking for you. Outside, boots crunched on snow. Voices gathered. For the first time since Eli had come to Red Hollow, the men of the town stood together in the square. Ranchers, shopkeepers, boys barely old enough to shave. Fear still lived in their eyes, but something else stood beside it now. Resolve. Crow entered, nodding once when he saw Eli awake. You're not riding, he said firmly. Eli gave a tired smile. Never was good at following orders. Crow leaned closer. This isn't about proving something anymore. Eli looked at Clara, really looked at her. At the woman who had lost one husband to the West and refused to let it harden her heart. I know, he said. That's why it's time I stopped standing alone. He reached for the badge. Clara's breath caught. Eli. He pressed the cold metal into her palm. If I die today, I don't want it dying with me. Give it to someone who understands what it costs. Her fingers curled around it, tears slipping free. You're talking like a man saying goodbye. No, he said softly. Like a man finally telling the truth. The gunfire came with the sun. Rourke's men charged down the hill, shadows against the white rifles flashing. The town answered not with panic, but with purpose. Shots rang out from behind wagons and doorframes. Horses screamed. Snow leaped into the air, red and white mixing again. Eli stood in the jailhouse doorway, revolver steady despite the pain burning through his chest. Crow fought beside him, moving like a man who had done this too many times to be afraid. Rourke appeared through the smoke, eyes wild, gun raised toward Clara as she ushered children to safety. Eli did not hesitate. The shot was clean. Final Rourke fell backward into the snow, his breath leaving him in a long, empty sigh. He looked up at Eli, confusion giving way to something like relief. "Still playin' hero," Rourke whispered. Eli lowered the gun. "No," he said. "Just doing what's right." When it was over, the snow kept falling, but softer now, as if the land itself had exhaled. The town stood changed. Eli survived the winter. He never fully healed, not in body or spirit, but something in him loosened its grip. Come spring, he hung the badge on a hook behind the jailhouse desk and did not put it back on. Red Hollow elected its first local sheriff that summer, a young rancher who had stood his ground that morning. Clara pinned the badge to his coat with steady hands. Eli watched from the porch, her hand in his. "You regret it?" she asked. He shook his head. Justice was never meant to be carried alone. Years later, folks would still tell the story of the night the badge bled in the snow. But some remembered another ending too, of a lawman who learned that love could be braver than the law, and a town that finally stood together. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Eli tipped his hat to Clara, and for the first time, he was exactly where he belonged.